reading this. Northern Michigan University has offered the opportunity to record oral interviews and eventually transcribe them to printed form relating to the establishment and development of the Women's Center, which has served people throughout the Upper Peninsula beginning in the mid-1970s. I'm Jane Ryan, and I will be doing the interviewing today with Becky Beauchamp. This interview is done in February of 2017 and is one of over 20, giving those with interest an overview of the Women's Center development and contributions to our region. Funding and other issues have forced the Women's Center to narrow its focus a bit from those early years, but it continues as an important resource and is located on South Front Street in Marquette, Michigan. The Women's Center celebrated its 40th anniversary in 2014. I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak today with Becky Beauchamp. She will tell us about her involvement over an extended period of time and roles with the Women's Center, and her perception of its mission and the value of that mission. The Women's Center and NMU appreciate your willingness to participate in this project, Becky. You can give us any background you'd like so we get to know you better, and then talk about your involvement with the Women's Center.
Well, I currently live in Traverse City. I've been there for over 20 years, and it was so interesting. When I moved there from Marquette, I realized very powerfully what an impact the Women's Center had on this community, because I expected, oh, you're moving to this resort area and things will be ahead of Marquette. Actually, I felt like I stepped back at least 10 years in terms of perception of women's leadership roles in the community. It was really quite an adjustment, and then I realized that the Women's Center had indeed not only had an impact on Marquette, but had really brought the community forward well ahead of where other communities were in the state, and that was very telling. And I think back to that now. Traverse City has come along, but when I went there, one of the first things I would do is lean over at a meeting and say, well, where are the women? So I was one of only a few women in the community in a leadership role, and that was just dumbfounding to me after having been here. So Marquette has always been ahead of its time, and I think the founding mothers at the Women's Center and their hard work over the years really made that difference.
What drew you into working and becoming involved with the Women's Center?
Well, I came to be involved when I was still an undergraduate at NMU. This was 1975, and there was a serial rapist on the streets in Marquette. There had been 3 known incidents, and the police chose not to let the community know about that because they were afraid it would cause an alarm. The 4th victim, who is me, who would not have been out on the street walking home alone had I known that this was out there. I was surprised because, having grown up in Marquette, you'd think these kinds of things don't happen here. Anyway, I was, I believe, instrumental in encouraging or insisting that the police let everyone know that this man was out there. But then I learned how the community did not have support for rape victims. The police were not prepared to deal with rape victims. The hospital didn't have evidence kits. And so it was an eye-opener for me, but I think the most telling thing is, I was 20, the women's movement was well underway. I thought I was just so independent and didn't need to be involved. And I remember as I was picking myself up off the street and trying to get myself together to go home, I remember very powerfully thinking, if this happens to women, there's no such thing as women's lib. And that was the making of an activist. And I just wanted to reach out to, I wanted to prevent that from happening to other people in the community, and I wanted to help others. And so there was Carlin Rapport right there. I mean, she was my first feminist mentor. She was concerned about what was happening in the community. She drew me in, and from there we went on to form a public awareness of sexual assault. We spoke in many schools and in public places, developed a self-defense program, worked with the police, ensured that the hospitals had the evidence kits. But we formed a rape victim support team, and we always had somebody on a beeper who could go to the ER or respond to calls from women who either had just been raped, or in many cases it had been years and they'd never told anyone. And so the awareness increased. And so I stayed involved with that until I left the community years later. So that brought me to an awareness that was very powerful.
So you said there was Carlin. There, as the Women's Center was underway at Northern at that time, or how did you happen to connect? How did you had to reach out to somebody?
The Women's Center was at Northern at that time, and I believe I learned that Carlin and others were concerned about having a community response, and I don't remember exactly how we got connected. But of course they drew me in, and actually it was the best way for me to heal from the experience, was to reach out and be involved in making things better in the community. I have some hindsight on it now. I was the news editor at the student newspaper at Northern. And I remember the day after the assault walking into the captain's office with my reporter's notebook and saying, please tell me the statement that you're issuing to the press today about what's happening in the community. And now I understand the jaw-dropping, look on his face. But I wrote the story for the student newspaper, and of course my name never got in it. So now I appreciate the spunk of a 20-year-old for that, but that was the climate in the community, though, of, okay, if this happens, we need to respond. And it was always in a positive way. It was always, let's all learn about this, let's increase awareness, let's reach out to victims. And so that was the Women's Center way always, I believe, was let's make things better.
And so there was a little good outcome from a horrible experience. Isn't that, it happens so often?
Right, and it certainly, I think for me, got me off my, young woman high horse of, I'm independent, I'm living my life, I don't know what all that fuss is about. It gave me an understanding and an appreciation that has continued, and I got to know some really very self-empowered women who were very devoted to other women in the community, and that changed the course of my life, I believe.
And it duplicates the story when you hear the other interviews. There are parallels all along the way. But I do believe our region has been blessed with some extraordinary women. I'm sure they're out there in other places, but there still is a core. And as you mentioned to me, many of the early founding mothers are still active. You become passionate and you don't want to see things decline in any way. Well, my understanding is you were there when the Women's Center was at Northern, when it moved to the Gill Hall, and then when they bought their place on South Front. Did you serve on the board and in any administrative ways as well? Or?
I did. I went to the meeting that was held when Northern announced that it would not be funding the Women's Center anymore, and there was a large group of women, and we split ourselves into committees, and somehow I was the chair of what we called the short-term fundraising committee. I made lifelong friends there, and for the next year plus, we did everything imaginable to raise money so that the center could go to the Guildhall and we could establish a community-based center. It wasn't easy, but it really did make it an independent center. So I was involved in the fundraising and then was a member of the board, and at one point was the chair of the board, and stayed involved through all of the years of transition and got to watch it grow. The bingo, the introduction of a bingo game was very interesting. I was the treasurer of the bingo game every Friday night. I was the person who counted the money and everything. And it was just so telling because there were a lot of bingo games in the community. And as you know, we women looked at how to do it. Jerry DeFont was key and said, "Wow, at all these bingo games, everyone looks so like despondent. There's just no laughter. We need to treat them like customers." And so we had this wonderful little cafe, and we were very service oriented toward the bingo game and added lots of features, and it became the most popular bingo game. But the revenue from that really did provide stability for the center to focus on being a good women's center and not just the constant drain of money. But it was never easy, and there were whole months when the staff worked without pay, which was very inspiring to everybody. And of course, Sally Mae was just the glue, always. She became the director and did a magnificent job for more years than anybody could imagine someone would have the energy to do it.
Right. At some point, because I remember others mentioning how important the bingo games were, but some grants started coming in, and weren't a couple of those crucial to the crisis intervention? I'm trying to recall myself, but somehow we got some training for police, and I think it was Matt Weesey who has been interviewed. We were so fortunate, again, to have persons with the right attitude about doing this. They could have just dismissed the whole concept, but again, I think Marquette was a trendsetter throughout the state with these kind of programs, and I think there was a grant involved. Do you recall?
Yeah, especially with Sally's wonderful leadership, that she began to explore increasing ways that the center could be involved in the community, and so there were grants. There were many people who stepped forward, and I think it always was that we were positive. It was never about being angry. It was always from the position of how can we serve. I think just the collective skills of the many women involved, and so we were able to reach out to folks in the prosecutor's office and in the legal community and in the law enforcement community. We made partners out of people, and when we couldn't, we made changes. And I have a distinct memory of a luncheon, a quiet lunch that a few of us had with the judges at the time, expressing concern about the incredibly lenient sentences that men who were abusing children sexually, that there were very lenient sentences, and some defense attorneys were allowed to treat the children in a courtroom in some ways that children cannot withstand. And so I always called it the white glove luncheon that we had, where we were very polite and expressed our concerns. And the message we got back basically was, we're only reflecting the community values. And so we decided that we had to demonstrate that the community values had changed. And Pat Michelow ran for district judge, and very uncommon to unseat a sitting district judge. But it was really the women saying, okay, we can't make allies out of you, so we'll find leaders who will do the right thing.
Good. And again, you're reiterating examples of the women who weren't giving up. They weren't stepping
Right.
back. They were saying, we know what should be and we'll work for it in a polite.
Right.
I like that, the white glove. That sounds good. Now, somebody mentioned to me about the funding in the bingo game. Do you see, coming back to visit the community and your experience in Traverse City, do you see things that you wish could be happening with our Women's Center or these kind of organizations in general? Again, I'm relying on other people, but they had to cut back on things like there used to be a lot of modeling of women in careers, the non-traditional, and maybe that isn't so necessary in 2015, 16, 17 because women are out in the workforce. But I've heard some people say they wished we could be doing more than like that. Are you have any opinion about that?
Well, I was a member of some of the initial role model teams, and that was so much fun, where we'd go into middle school and high schools, and many of us were in what then were non-traditional careers for women, and speaking with young women. And I think the dreams and aspirations of young women have really changed, but there's still issues. Math and science, of course, I think a concentration there, and political leadership is one where I think we continue to need to encourage women to see themselves as leaders, not just supporters of leaders, but stepping forward. And in the current climate of the Women's March, having just been a month ago, I'm seeing that from women who've never thought about being politically active, who are stepping forward and saying, wow, we can do this. So that is an improvement. I wish that money wasn't always such an issue. That always continues to be a problem. And there still isn't likely the awareness of the extent of domestic violence that still exists, the dangers of domestic violence, certainly the number of women who are still sexually assaulted, the sexual abuse of young women. Sometimes it seems like, wow, wish we had made even more progress there. And while some people might think that women's centers aren't needed anymore, they're needed as much as ever.
I'm glad you said that, because that's come out in so many realms. There can be great progress, but there also can be significant setbacks, and we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. So being vigilant, supplementing, maybe shifting gears with the times seems to be important.
Right. Just the lack of understanding that reproductive rights are self-empowerment for women, that self-determination, that we still don't have that understanding that if a woman can't be in charge herself of whether or not and when she has children, I think really indicates that we still have a long way to go about our perceived role in society.
You mentioned your own career might have been considered non-traditional. Tell us a little bit about your career.
Well, my first job out of my undergraduate program was I worked for U.S. Senator Don Regal in his Upper Peninsula office for his first 6-year term. And that was just such a wonderful introduction to so many aspects of government. It was just a great job, and I was doing that simultaneously with all of the involvement with the Women's Center. So it was a very heady time for a young person, and that really was a non-traditional role. Then I did time working in state government and economic development programs, and I remember when I was pregnant with my first child, and I went into a meeting with a man who ran a corporation in Escanaba, and I was pretty visibly pregnant, and introduced myself and sat down, and he said, "Well, I thought I was going to get to talk to a man." And I didn't giggle. I just said, "Well, I'm going to have to do." And I was able to go on and give him good service, and maybe he realized that times were changing, but that was a field that there weren't a lot of women in at that time either. So,
Was your degree in economics or political science?
my degree was in political science and English, with a minor in journalism. So I was interested in very much in the public sphere, and have stayed. I guess I've never really worked in the private sector throughout my career. I've been in higher education and arts, and a good deal of time in nonprofit management.
Excellent. Gives us a good example of how careers evolve. Now, are you in the retirement mode yet, or?
Well, I've just returned to Oklahoma, or to Traverse City. I've spent the last 5 years in Oklahoma City, which was also a case study in how far women have to go. It was a state where the word woman is a foreign language. Everyone's a girl. Professional women are girls. Have your girl call my girl. I still would hear that. So that was really stepping back in time. But I had a great job there. So I'm just newly returned, and now I'm working as a consultant with nonprofit organizations, and I've got one unit government project right now too.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure your talents are being put to good use. Is there any aspect of the Women's Center discussion that we've not talked about that you'd like to mention? Any other experiences per se that?
It's just the whole Women's Center from its early days to now has always been about the grit and determination of women leaders and women reaching out to other women, and doing whatever it takes to keep these programs going. And that's still a source of inspiration to me. And I think in the current climate of we're seeing this political involvement from women. I'm sad that we're still in so many of the same trenches, but at the same time, always amazed by the grit and determination of women.
Not going away, right? Not going away. Well, thank you, Becky, for sharing your time with us and for your contributions to the Women's Center. So carry on, whatever field. Thank you.